We all have thoughts, feelings, and memories that can be difficult to deal with. In some cases, people deal with such feelings by utilizing what are known as defense mechanisms. These defense mechanisms are unconscious psychological responses that protect people from threats and things that they don't want to think about or deal with. Freud divides man's personality into 3 levels: self, ego, and superego. Ego is the personality that confronts reality. In this process, the self must reconcile the conflict between self and superego, self seeking to satisfy all desires, needs, and inspiration, whereas the superego is trying to orient the self to the ideal and the standard action. What happens when the ego cannot deal with the demands of self and superego? According to Freud, anxiety is an unpleasant inner state that people seek to avoid. Anxiety acts as a signal to the ego that things are not going the way they should. As a result, the ego then employs some sort of defense mechanism to help reduce these feelings of anxiety. Not all types of anxiety are created equal, nor do these anxieties stem from the same sources. Freud identified 3 types of anxiety. Neurotic anxiety is the unconscious worry that we will lose control of the id's urges, resulting in punishment for inappropriate behavior. Reality anxiety is fear of real-world events. The cause of this anxiety is usually easily identified. For example, a person might fear receiving a dog bite when they are near a menacing dog. The most common way of reducing this anxiety is to avoid the threatening object. Moral anxiety involves a fear of violating our own moral. Denial is probably one of the best-known defense mechanisms, used often to describe situations in which people seem unable to face reality or admit an obvious truth. Repression is another well-known defense mechanism. Repression acts to keep information out of conscious awareness. However, these memories don't just disappear. They continue to influence our behavior. For example, a person who has repressed memories of abuse suffered as a child may later have difficulty forming relationships. Emotional translation means dropping our discontent, emotion, and impulsive intent on others or things that are less threatening to us. Do not cut off your nose to spite your face is a common example of this defense mechanism. Sublimation that allows us to act out on acceptable impulses by converting these behaviors into a more acceptable form. For example, a person experiencing extreme anger might take up kickboxing as a means of venting frustration. Projection is a defense mechanism that involves taking our own unacceptable qualities or feelings and ascribing them to other people. For example, if you have a strong dislike for someone, you might instead believe that he or she does not like you. Intellectualization works to reduce anxiety by thinking about events in a cold, clinical way. This defense mechanism allows us to avoid thinking about the stressful, emotional aspect of the situation and instead focus only on the intellectual component. For example, a person who has just been diagnosed with a terminal illness might focus on learning everything about the disease in order to avoid distress and remain distant from the reality. Rationalization is a defense mechanism that involves explaining an unacceptable behavior or feeling in a rational or logical manner, avoiding the true reasons for the behavior. For example, a person who is turned down for a date might rationalize the situation by saying they were not attracted to the other person anyway. A student might blame a poor exam score on the instructor rather than his or her lack of preparation. When confronted by stressful events, people sometimes abandon coping strategies and revert to patterns of behavior used earlier in development. For example, an individual fixated at an earlier developmental stage might cry or sulk upon hearing unpleasant news. Reaction formation reduces anxiety by taking up the opposite feeling, impulse, or behavior. An example of reaction formation would be treating someone you strongly dislike in an excessively friendly manner in order to hide your true feelings. Acting out. In this type of defense, the individual copes with stress by engaging in actions rather than reflecting upon internal feelings. Affiliation. This involves turning to other people for support. Aim inhibition. In this type of defense, the individual accepts a modified form of their original goal. Altruism. Satisfying internal needs throughout helping others. Avoidance. Refusing to deal with or encounter unpleasant objects or situations. Compensation. Overachieving in one area to compensate for failures in another. Humor, pointing out the funny or ironic aspects of a situation. Passive aggression, indirectly expressing anger. Fantasy, avoiding reality by retreating to a safe place within one's mind. It is important to remember that defense mechanisms can be both good and bad. They can serve a helpful role by protecting your ego from stress and providing a healthy outlet. In other instances, these defense mechanisms might hold you back from facing reality and can act as a form of self-deception.